This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, where we discuss the latest and greatest news in the world of sports. I am Alex.
And I'm Anthony.
And it's the duo today without Ben. He'll be back tomorrow, of course, and sans me, I'll be out, but Jeremiah will be joining the team. But until then, you got some great back and forth from me and Anthony here. We're going to be talking ALCS now that is over. We're going to be talking NLCS now that is really just hitting its stride. We have a game tonight. It's now tied 2-2 between the Cubs and the Dodgers. Yeah, and it's the last game in LA. So we're going to pretty much talk about that, kind of see where they're sitting now heading into tonight's Game 5. And then we will preview tonight's Thursday night football game as well. But we're going to start with the Cleveland Indians, who did clinch their trip to the Fall Classic, beating the Blue Jays 3-0, winning, well, you could say pretty much dominating, winning 4 games to 1 out of 5, even though this was a 7-game series if they needed it to be. It was pretty good in terms of a pitching duel in the beginnings. You know, gave up 1 run early on the Blue Jays side, but the real story was Ryan Merritt, a pitcher who had just 11 total innings in the majors coming into this start. He was pretty good. He gave up. He carried a perfect game through 3 1/3 inning. He gave up a single to Josh Donaldson that broke that up. He ended up pitching pretty much 4 2/3, and they took him out. But it was pretty good, if you ask me. I mean, I don't think you could have asked for a better 4 2/3. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, he wasn't used to necessarily going, like, you didn't expect him to go 8-9 innings, kind of do a complete game thing. I mean, the most pitches he ever had throughout a whole game going into this year was 62 on September 30th against the Royals. So he was somebody who basically, as long as he could get maybe into the 5th inning, you were okay with that. And he got through 4 1/3 inning, gave up a couple of hits, 3 strikeouts, you know, all considered, you know, what you were expecting out of him. He did really well. He didn't get the win because you have to go 5 innings to get the win. But he played, you know, he did enough for them to advance in this ALCS. And if you look at what they've done, just the Cleveland Indians in general against the Blue Jays, in all but 1 game, except for Game 4 where Toronto, you know, put up 5, they never scored more than 2 runs. They shut out in Game 1, 1 in Game 2, 2 in Game 3, and 0 in Game 5. So basically, as good as the Blue Jays were all year, you know, you get all the production they've had either from Jose Bautista or Encarnacion or Donaldson or whatever. Like, none of that basically came to fruition in the postseason. Encarnacion really struggled. Tulowitzki struggled. Even Russell Martin struggled with that. And now you got the Indians. You got Andrew Miller, who was the MVP of the ALCS. Basically, when he came in, it didn't matter 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever inning he was coming in. Like, it was basically over with. Like, you know, your confidence kind of got shook a little bit when he came in because he only gave up a total, like in the whole ALCS, he only gave up 3 total hits, and he went for 8 2/3 innings and only gave up those 3 hits. So, I mean, he was pretty dominant the whole time. I mean, he hasn't given up a run since September 7th. And, you know, he is one of those, you know, he had the move where he got from New York to Cleveland, basically, you know, wanted to be that setup guy to basically make the bullpen reliable. We saw with the Giants, basically, you need a good bullpen to advance. And,
very true.
You know, whether it was Chapman from the Yankees or Andrew Miller from the Yankees, both of them now, basically, that helps with your, you know, ball club. And now the Yankees are set up because you got some good players in that trade. But now, you know, with the Cleveland Indians advancing, you actually set up for kind of a interesting day in the city of Cleveland. So on Tuesday, whether it's against the Dodgers or against the Cubs, they're going to play Game 1 in Cleveland because Cleveland, you know, won the All-Star game in that really weird, you win this game, now you control the, you know, home field. In the World Series
I like that. It actually, for once, there's a almost a incentive to, besides money, to win the All-Star game. MLB, it's always been that way. The side that wins gets home field advantage in the World Series, and I think that's a cool way of doing it.
So now you have that, and now Cleveland. You'll have Game 1. People are going to be amped for that, but you also have the Cleveland Cavaliers home opener. They're going to get their rings. They're going to unveil the banner, everything else like that. So that whole city on Tuesday is just going to be ruckus and insane.
Oh yeah, it really will. And then going back to what you're saying about Miller, I mean, he was the MVP. There's a few guys that could have been considered for the MVP. You have Francisco Lindor, who had an impressive series overall. He got a single in the first, and then later scored on Mac Napoli's double. And then he also singled in the third and a double in the ninth. He went 3 for 4 with 1 run scored. He played great the entire series there for the Indians, one of many players that played very well. And then if you go for the sentimental pick, Cocos Crisp, played a pretty good game. He only played 6 innings, but he had his solo home run in the 4th inning, 1 for 2 with that 1 run scored on the RBI, and he got replaced defensively by Rajay Davis later in the game. But he played well for a team that he started with and got to go back with. And then moving to the Blue Jays, one thing before we move on here, one thing that was interesting to me was going into this game, the Blue Jays, going to the series, the Blue Jays have been a very dominant offensive team through the postseason last while.
Right.
But they only managed 6 hits in the entire game.
Yeah.
They couldn't muster any offense. Edwin Encarnacion and Tulowitzki were the worst of both of them. They went 0 for 8 in this game. And then Jose Bautista, going into this game, saying about Ryan Merritt that he should be the one shaking his boots, as opposed to them on the edge of elimination, purely based off of their experience and all this stuff, and how, young in terms of baseball experience Merritt is. And Jose Bautista is one of the leading catalysts in that bad game yesterday. He went 0 for 2 against Merritt. He ended up getting a hit later in the game, but he didn't get a hit against the guy that he said should be worried about their ability. So, I mean, that's, if you talk like that, you got to you have to come in and show that you back up what you say. And then the Blue Jays were down 3-0 at that point. Bautista got that single, and then sure enough, here comes Andrew Miller. So that we both know how that ended.
Yeah, and if you look at how the Indians or the Blue Jays were actually playing, if you take all of the games that they lost, they only had a total of 23 hits in the 4 games they lost. So they struggled basically hitting every single game out. They were never one of those teams that we saw in the regular season, whether it was Donaldson, who had 37 home runs, whether it was Bautista, who had 22 home runs, Encarnacion had 42, even Tulowitzki got 24. Like, they were a pretty good offensive juggernaut the whole year, and then they get into Cleveland or come back to Toronto, and they're not the same team. It's harder to do it in the playoffs because basically once you get to the playoffs, if you're doing it in the regular season, you can play the Rays, you can play the Twins, you can play the Atlanta Braves, you can play the bad teams that you can get good stuff off of. Once you get to the playoffs, you're facing the best teams. You're facing Andrew Miller, who you're not going to get a hit off. You're facing Corey Kluber. You're facing the people that are there for a reason, and we saw whatever offensive production. I mean, heck, we even saw that in the NLCS with the Cubs, whatever they were doing. Now they got on track last night, but it wasn't even the same thing with that. So it'll be interesting to see what Toronto does, because while the hitting has been really good, the pitching not exactly the same. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what they do moving forward to the World Series for sure. I think it's going to be I think it's not really going to differ who they play, whether it's the Dodgers or the Cubs. I would say for sure they're probably favored against the Dodgers. The Cubs, I'm sure, with the way both these teams played all year, it's going to be hard to really differentiate who one would be in terms of a favorite. But this is definitely, and then again, too, you look at the series and the last few series, the team that often gets an early break like this, they're done on Wednesday. They won't have a game until the Tuesday is when it starts. Right. The last team to win a World Series with that long of a break was the 2008 Phillies over the Rays. And that was a wacky game. That was a wacky series in general because of so many games that were postponed due to rain. So, that maybe kind of, even them up in terms of time between. But, excuse me, it's not always a it's not always a good thing to get this break. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here, I think,
Yeah, we saw with the Rockies, what was it, 07, when they basically were just like mauling through teams and they got to the World Series and got swept. So,
Or we saw it with the Giants and the Tigers in 2012. The Giants were having to go to Game 7 and Game 5, and make it all the way through there. And then the Tigers had their break, and the Giants had to fight through Game 7 all the way with the Cardinals. And then they get to the World Series after having to go the length in the last 2 series, and they sweep them.
right.
So we've seen that before, and again, it hasn't happened for a team to win after a long break like that since 2008. So very interesting events upcoming here in the next few days for the NLCS, which we'll take our break and talk about in a second, and then these now AL champion Indians. So let's take our first break, and we will come back, and we're going to review and recap last night's NLCS game and talk about tonight's NLCS Game 5. So we'll do that in just a moment here after our break at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, and we're talking NLCS now. Game 4 of the NLCS was last night, and the series is now tied 2-2 after a 10-2 stomping of the Dodgers in favor of the Cubs last night. They were pretty even through the first 3. Montgomery pitched well. Julio Urias, he pitched well as well through the first few innings, but the real beginning of the end in this game was the 4th inning, in which they scored 4 runs in that one, and then the Dodgers came back and scored 2 in the 5th after 1 more in the 5th for the Cubs. So at that point, it was 5-2. Kind of looking at it like, okay, this game's not over yet. The Dodgers started putting some stuff together, and then the 6th came around, and it just broke loose. I was at a restaurant with my friend. I was at BJ's, and I was sitting there eating, and we were talking. He's not a huge baseball fan. He's an athletics fan. He's not a diehard baseball fan by any means.
Right.
And we're sitting there, we're talking, and of course I keep my eye on it, and he's not really looking up. Every once in a while he'll look up, and he's like, "Man, 5-2. That's a close game." The next time he looked up, and it must have been maybe 10 minutes.
Right.
It was 10-2, and he's like, "What happened?" And yeah, they just unleashed in the 5th inning there. They pretty much in the 4th, you have the single that scored Ben Zobrist, Hayward grounded, and then you had a Addison Russell home run, a big breakthrough home run for him, or at least a hit in general, big hit for somebody who had really struggled up to that point in the series. We talked about him yesterday on the sports show. Rizzo home run after that in the 5th, and then Turner got a single that scored 2. So you look, okay, at 5-2. Well, in the 6th, you had a Fowler single to right that scored Addison Russell. You had a Rizzo single that scored Montgomery, and it scored Dexter Fowler. And then you had a Baez sacrifice fly, and Bryant scored, and then Rizzo scored because of a throwing error that was like an error in 2 in 1 play. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it was 10-2. I mean, it was 5-2, then all of a sudden 6-2, you're like, okay, manageable. And it was 8-2, you're like, oh, okay, here we go. 10-2 within minutes. This was a wacky game.
Yeah. It was one of the games, like the back-to-back games where the Cubs before that got shut out. Now you get 10-2, kind of getting back on track with what you wanted from the Cubs. Like I said, the Cubs all year, kind of like with the Blue Jays. Mm-hmm. Very good offensive ball club, be it Rizzo or Bryant. Bryant might be the NL MVP after everything's said and done. Rizzo was really struggling up until this game, but he got that infield signal in the game before, and now he goes with 3 for 5, so he's getting back on track with everything else. Now he kind of has that confidence. You talked about Russell. He's got his confidence. So now the team is kind of rebounded a little bit. Now you've got the best of 3 series with 2 of them being in Chicago. Yeah, you probably have to go against Clayton Kershaw in Game 6. But if you can get Game 5, that'll at least help not, make it all gloom and doom when you get to Kershaw. And for the Dodgers, they're throwing out Maeda, and Lester's going for the Cubs. So, and Lester's been doing pretty well. You get some confidence with him. Just please don't bunt to Lester. That's not going to go well once he throws to first kind of thing.
Get huge leadoffs.
He'll look at you and just be like, okay, you can just keep moving. I'm not going to throw it back.
I'd rather kick it to you.
Dude, the best thing was I don't know if they hit it back to him or something like that, but I saw him.
Didn't he run it to him?
He ran to first. Yeah, he didn't toss it. He was just like, I'm just going to keep this, and just ran to first base. And I thought it was the funniest thing. It's just God, he doesn't even have the confidence to do that.
But you get the yips,
Yeah. But, against the Dodgers last time, he went 6 innings, only gave up 1 earned run, had a good outing there. Before that, against the Giants, 8 innings, no run. So he's been pretty good in the playoffs so far. He's not any stranger to the playoffs. He was there with Boston. So that part's not going to scare him. And you go into Game 5, now the Cubs have some confidence. Now the Cubs have basically, what was the stat yesterday? They said basically with the Cubs being shut out in back-to-back games hadn't happened since 1919 with the White Sox, the team that was legitimately trying to lose because they were betting on baseball.
The so-called Black Sox.
And now with the Cubs, it's okay, now you kind of stabilized a little bit. You got Lester going in Game 5, and now the momentum's kind of swung around, for the Cubs.
Mm-hmm. I think this is definitely, now the Cubs are really the presser. One would think, obviously, regardless of the obvious factor,
right,
wanting to win, you would think they really want to win this one because going home somewhere you're probably going to face Kershaw.
Right.
I believe it is his turn next. They play pretty good in Wrigley. You would think they want to be in the elimination position to eliminate the Dodgers next game. Well, obviously, But in the sense of, you would imagine they want nothing more than to go home.
Also, you're going to have Cubs fans. Imagine if they're down 3-2 going to Wrigley, Game 6. Those fans are going to be tight. They're not going to be talking. They're going to be so afraid.
Yeah, because Kershaw's pitching in that.
Yeah.
No matter what.
If you're down 3-2 and Kershaw's
no matter if
pitching,
you're down or up 3-2.
Yeah.
He's pitching that game.
Uh-huh.
So they want to obviously come out with this win. That goes without saying. But,
right,
especially going into Game 6.
Yeah.
Where they're going to be back in Chicago, they want that one.
Yeah.
They want that one big time because, like you said, it's Kershaw for sure. The Cubs don't have anybody listed, obviously.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But I would imagine it would be, you think they'd throw Arrieta or Hendricks at him?
Hendricks probably, because Arrieta,
he's got
earlier,
worked a bit. Yeah, so, obviously, one would say they want to win that one. No, I don't know who wouldn't want to, but especially because, they feel like they could really make it work going back.
Right.
You want to be facing Kershaw up a game, definitely not elimination, and you want to be doing it in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's take our last break here. We're going to come back and we'll move to football. We'll talk Thursday night football between the Bears and the Packers here in just a minute at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
And we are back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. And now we're going to move into football. And we have some NFL football tonight. The Chicago Bears are taking on the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau Field, a NFC matchup in the north there. It is a Thursday night matchup, as we have had every week this year in the NFL. We're looking at an interesting game. We have the 1-5 Bears, who are winless on the road, and the Packers, who are 3-2, but they are much better so far at home this year, 2-1 on the year. Of course, they just lost to the Cowboys, but you would think they're ready for a comeback game. But health is definitely an issue for them. Devontae Adams is questionable for this one. Aberdarius is out. Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, their two starting corners opposite of Sam Shields, who's got put on the IR, are both out. You have Chris Banjo, a backup safety, out. Then you look at your running backs. Lacey, out. James Starks, out. You just went and got Niall Davis. You have practice squad member Don Jackson, who should be coming up off the practice squad today. He should more than likely be the starter, seeing as he's going to know the offense a lot better than one would imagine Niall Davis, who's been there since Monday, would know. They have a lot of injuries on both sides of the ball, and this is something that's really been an issue for them, whether their offense has been clicking or not so far this year.
Yeah, and you look at it with Jordy Nelson, somebody who's coming back off of a torn ACL. He's somebody who, you knew kind of would take a second for him to get back. He's not going to come out, game one and be the same guy that he was in the past. You kind of got to give it a little bit of time, maybe this whole year, to kind of prepare. Also, he's 31 years old. He had 100 yards against Detroit Lions, but the Detroit Lions, secondary isn't exactly the best in the NFL. But there's been a couple of games where he's been held under even 40 receiving yards. Has had 5 touchdown passes, so at least in a fantasy perspective, he's done pretty well as far as that goes. With the Packers, like you said, the offense isn't exactly what we would expect from Aaron Rodgers. Like, we kind of expect Aaron Rodgers to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. At least statistically, he hasn't been that guy. And Eddie Lacy's kind of been up and down, for the team. Now he's hurt, so now you're going to bring in either Niall Davis, Don Jackson. We're going to see, what they can actually do on a short rest. The good thing for the Packers is they're going to be in Lambeau. And we've seen over the last, few weeks, basically, if you're the home team on a Thursday night game, you have an advantage there because, you don't have to travel. Yes, your body hurts or whatever, but you can, rest in your own bed. You don't have to be flying on a plane all around. You don't have to do anything else like that. And for the Packers, they are the better team. Like I said, they're 3-2, and the Bears, the entire season basically haven't looked good. They have one win where they barely beat the Lions, but they lost to the Colts, they lost to the Jaguars, they lost to the Eagles, they lost to the Texans. All 4 of those teams. The Eagles are okay, but the rest of those teams are no good. All of those teams are basically teams that are on the lower end. I mean, the Jaguars, Colts, and Texans, all 3 of them have a losing point differential. So you look at the Bears, and, you have Brian Hoyer, who's been playing better, but, it's not done anything to necessarily make the team itself better. Like, Jay Cutler is one of those quarterbacks who looks like a good quarterback because he has a strong arm, but he makes dumb passes. At least for Brian Hoyer, you can say he hasn't done that. He's got 6 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, so he's been somebody who you can at least rely on not to be a disaster. You have Jordan Howard, who's been looking good for the Chicago Bears as far as being, a solid enough running back. He's got a couple 100-yard games, and even now the emergence of Cameron Meredith, he's had back-to-back 100-yard receiving games over with Indianapolis and Jacksonville. So as an offense, at least the team looks pretty solid. It's just that defense is really bad. They've been allowing, a lot of yards on the ground. Against the pass, they actually haven't been terrible, but you got to imagine that Aaron Rodgers, and you give it, like I said, either Niall Davis, Don Jackson, basically they're going to be home. You want to kind of stabilize the game. Don't let anything get out of control. Just get the win. After that, you got 10 days to basically rest, recuperate for the Packers. Understanding that's at home, I would go with the Packers, being that they're a better team, being that they're at home, and being the fact that the Chicago Bears have a really bad defense in general.
Yeah, as it stands, their defense, they're getting currently 16.8 points a game, and they're giving up 23.8. We saw them drop a late one to the Jaguars last week. They're averaging just under 300 yards passing and 91 yards on the ground, which isn't amazing, but that's not bad either.
Right.
But they're allowing 353.5 yards a game as it stands. So, and I'm sorry, those numbers that I said a second ago were the numbers they average. They average 245 yards to quarterbacks opposing them and 107 rush yards, so a little bit worse there in that sense. A little bit better in terms of passing, but they have some work to do. The Bears, like you said, they're 1-5. They're at the bottom of the division. They have no hope for this season. We really have to start thinking about what's going to be going for next year. You lost Kevin White, or at least even when he's healthy, he's invisible almost anyway. Alshon's still playing at a high level, but when you have one player that's better than the entire team put together,
right?
Yeah, you have to see if that's really worth keeping that one player, maybe trading them. maybe trying to build around them. There's so many things they can do.
Yeah.
One would imagine they probably have to draft a quarterback this year, whether Cutler's gone or Hoyer's gone or they're both gone or maybe Hoyer stays. You still imagine he's probably not the long-term answer there. You have a young running back that's not too bad in Howard, and then they have Langford as well, who's a good running back. He's shown he's a good running back. Mm-hmm. And then you have Alshon, you have Kevin White, you have some young player makers. You just need to build with that team. But it sounds like we're in agreement that they are going to be the losers in this one. The Packers are going to win this one.
Yeah, the Bears might score, a little bit of points, but at the same time, it's looking like they're going to give up a lot of points because outside of the one win they had against the Lions, you gave up 29 to the Eagles, you gave up 31 to the Cowboys, you gave up 29 to the Colts. So the defense, probably will give up, say, about 24 points, maybe take a little bit of that off it for being a Thursday night game. Their offense has been terrible, 14-14, 17-17, and 23-16. So they're basically never scoring above 20 points. So, if the Packers can get to 21, it looks like they'll be pretty set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm going to give it to the Packers in this one. We've seen crazier things, but I think I'll have to give it to the Packers. They're more of an even team than one would expect a huge upset to occur in, So, yes, I'm going to give it to the Packers. I'm not very good at guessing scores, so I'm going to leave that alone.
Sure.
But I do think the Packers will win this one. One last bit of news before we get going today. I mentioned yesterday Joe Flacco missed practice. Mm-hmm. Well, he missed it again today. I think it was either his throwing shoulder or his left shoulder. Of course, there's only two. Can only be so wrong. But he had some pain in it. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from that. Like I said, the Ravens didn't practice today for Flacco, and they had 7 others not practicing either. Terrell Suggs, obviously, he tore his bicep.
Yeah.
Elvis Dumervil didn't practice today. C.J. Mosley. There's 3 solid players on your defense, all linebackers. Marshall Yonda is guard. Devin Hester, of course, probably just a day off for him. Cerise Wright, one of your starting corners. Steve Smith is coming back from an injury. And then Jimmy Smith practiced, but he was wearing a concussion non-contact jersey because he's coming off of a concussion. So some stuff to keep in mind heading into the weekend. Now, of course, I will be back on Monday. I'm not here on Fridays, but you guys would be in good hands with Anthony here.
I'll be back tomorrow.
Yes, and Ben will be here as well.
Yep.
And Jeremiah will be here. So you guys will be in good company and in good hands. But I'd like to thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. As always, I will see you on Monday. For Ben, I am Alex.
And I'm Anthony.
And we will see you guys next time. You have a good rest of your day. Enjoy football. Enjoy your sports tonight with baseball. And don't forget there's some college football to keep in mind as well. The U taking on Virginia Tech and BYU taking on Boise State. That is at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 Eastern, and 7:15 Pacific Standard Time. That's a 10:15 start for any of you East Coast Boise State fans or BYU fans. That's a tough one. But enjoy football, enjoy baseball, enjoy all sports. Don't forget preseason basketball and hockey are now in full swing. We will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.